The man who should have warned her. I watched her climb down from the stage, and I said nothing. I've gone back to that a lot of nights since, the shade I was standing in, the words I had and kept. It was past noon and hot enough that the coach came in wrapped in its own dust, the driver not pushing the team because there was nothing in Cinderwash worth hurrying toward. I had the porch of the Mercantile and a post to lean on and my hat pulled low, which was most of what I did with my days. Be somewhere, be no trouble to look at. A man learns to take up a small amount of the world and hold still in it. The town gave me room, the way it always did. Old Pruitt swept his boardwalk 3 feet shorter when he came near me and turned back the other way. A boy under a water yoke found the far side of the street rather than past me, towing his dog after him by the scruff. I didn't take it hard. It was the one honest thing the place had left. It knew what to be afraid of, even when it feared the wrong men and paid the right ones for the privilege. Across the way, 2 of Dolan's men had the saloon's shade, chairs tipped back on 2 legs, watching the stage the way a cat watches a door. That was the arrangement. The sheriff's men sat in the cool and the town stood in the sun, and everyone agreed not to say why out loud. A place runs quiet when the only law in it is also the thing you'd want the law against. The 2 on the porch didn't tip their chairs my way. They knew me some, or knew of me, which out here comes to the same thing. It's how a man learns which trouble to leave sleeping. She stepped down like the street owed her a clean place to set her boot. The stage had carried her and a drummer in a checked suit and 3 crates of tinned goods for Halloran's store. And of the 4, she was the only freight that didn't belong. You could tell at 50 feet. A grey travelling dress cut with care, the dust already spoiling the hem she was working to keep up off the ground. A small case she wouldn't give over to the driver. She stood a moment in all that white light and looked up the street. The boarded windows, the saloon with its paint worn to bone, the church with no bell in the tower. And I watched her decide to be brave about it. People did that here at the beginning. It didn't hold, but they all had it once. I should have been thinking about the heat, or the horse I hadn't managed to sell, or nothing at all, which was my best and steadiest subject. Instead, I was running the arithmetic I couldn't help running on anyone new. Where her hands were, whether she'd come armed, she hadn't. How long a woman built like that lasted in a town Dolan owned, supposing she meant to stay. The figure I came to was not large. There was a thing in my saddlebag I hadn't unwrapped in 3 years. I kept it in oilcloth so I wouldn't have to look at the shape of it. I couldn't tell you why she called it up in me. Something about a person walking straight into a place that would eat them, certain they were owed better. I'd worn that same certainty once, out on the front of me where anybody could read it. Then I'd folded it small and put it away and gone to ground in the last town on earth God would think to check. And most days that held fine. She got her bearings and started up toward the boardwalk, and I'll grant her this, she chose right on instinct. Toward the one lit door that wasn't the saloon, Mrs. Abernathy's place, where a body could still get a room and a civil word for honest coin. But she stopped first at the box, at the driver, who was already gathering his lines and wanting to be gone. She said something up to him. He shook his head, short, and looked down at his hands, and I knew that look from the inside. It's the face a man makes when a stranger asks him a question that could get him buried for answering it. The wind came up the street toward me the way it did those afternoons, and it carried a piece of her voice. Not the whole of it, enough. She was asking after a man. She said his name plain, the way you say a name you love and expect handed back to you. Whitfield. And the arithmetic I'd been running on her stopped, because I already had a place set for that name, and it wasn't a place you could walk a person to. I knew where Whitfield was. Not the particular of it, not the exact ground, but the fact of him, the way you know a debt has gone bad before you ever open the book. A man had come into Cinder Wash a while back with his questions and that same clean, expecting way of asking them. He'd put them to the wrong doorways. Then he'd quit asking, and quit being anywhere at all, and the town let its breath out and went back to its business, the way it does. She had come to marry that. You could hear it plain in how she said it. She'd crossed the whole country to marry it, and it was already down under the dust somewhere, with the rest of what Dolan didn't care to have found. I had time. That's the piece I can't set down. She was 40 feet off with her back to me and her case in her fist, and I had the whole long afternoon and the plain truth of it and a mouth to say it with. Mum. It's a short word. You can get it out before a person takes 2 more steps. I pulled my hat down lower and watched her walk to Abernathy's door and go in out of the sun. That was the first thing I didn't say to Evelyn Carter. It wasn't the last. The next stage south came through 2 days later, and she wasn't on it. I know because I made a point of not watching for it, and then watched anyway. The coach took on the drummer, a widow bound for her sister in Ellis, and a bundle of green hides, and rolled out, and the dust settled, and Evelyn Carter was still in Cinder Wash. By then she'd started in on the town, and a town like that keeps no secrets from itself. Word of her came to me whether I wanted it or not, running downhill the way water does. She'd gone to the land office and found it shut, with the shade drawn. She put her question to Halloran and watched him get very busy with his scales. She'd stopped a girl outside the church, and the girl said something low and then looked sick for having said it, and went off quick with her skirts in both hands. She saved Dolan for last, which was backward, but she didn't know the order of things yet. I was crossing from the livery when she came out of his office. I slowed the way you slow at a thing you know you shouldn't watch. She took the 2 steps down, careful, her back straight, her face set in order. But she stopped on the bottom step a breath too long before she picked a direction, and I've stood like that. It's what a body does when a man with a badge has just handed them a smooth lie, and their stomach knows it before their head can say why. Dolan would have been gentle with her. He was always gentle. He'd have leaned back and told her Whitfield pulled up stakes owing money, or chasing a claim, or a woman. Men do that, ma'am, more than a lady would credit. And he'd have studied her the whole while to measure how much she swallowed and how much grief she'd make of it. That was Dolan's real work, the measuring. The badge was only the thing that let him do it in daylight. She found me that evening, which meant somebody had aimed her at me, and I didn't thank them. I had the back corner of the saloon, with a glass I was in no hurry to finish, where I could keep the door in front of me. She came straight across the floor like the room wasn't full of the exact men she ought to have feared. That was the first thing about her I couldn't set down easy. She was afraid. It was plain in her hands. And she came on anyway. "They tell me you know this town," she said. No greeting. She stopped at the edge of my table, and folded her hands to keep them still. "They told you wrong," I said. "I know how to be left alone in it. That's a different trade." "A man is missing. Thomas Whitfield. She caught on the word and then set it down. "My intended. He was here. He wrote to me from here. And the whole town has decided, all at the same hour, that it never laid eyes on him." "Then they've got more sense than you. There's a stage south every other day. I'd be on the next one." She didn't move. "You're the third man to tell me to leave. Not one of you will say why. It's a strange kind of warning, the sort that won't name the thing it's warning about." I had no answer for that I was willing to spend, so I turned my glass a quarter turn on the wood and gave her none, which she took, rightly, for an answer of its own. "He left me a letter," she said, quieter now, leaning in so the room couldn't have it, "to keep against trouble. He wrote that if the law here ever turned against me, I wasn't to run to the sheriff, that in a place like this, the peace is sometimes kept by a man who carries a star and doesn't flaunt it, a man the sheriff could never be. He told me to find that man and set my whole trust on him." She held my eyes. "Dolan wears a star. I sat across from it an hour ago, and I'd sooner trust the snake under my porch. So I'm asking you plain. Do you know who my Thomas meant?" Here is what I didn't tell her. That there was oilcloth in my saddlebag, with a shape wrapped inside it. I hadn't let the light touch in 3 years, and the shape had a point to it once. That the man she was describing, and the man I'd worn out being, might have passed to each other, in some better year, before I learnt what it truly costs to believe you can keep people. She'd crossed the country to find a particular answer, and there was a fair chance it was sitting at the table in front of her, not drinking its whiskey. So I gave her the answer that cost me nothing instead. "The only star in Cinderwash rides on Dolan's chest," I said, and got up. "You already told me what it's worth to you. That's your answer, Mom. There isn't a second one." It was a lie, or near enough that the difference wouldn't have comforted either of us. I left her at my table and went out the back where the air was, and I didn't turn to watch her face take it. I meant for that to be the end of my part. I'd said my nothing and kept my distance, and that was supposed to settle it. But I don't sleep the way men who've earned their rest sleep, and past midnight I was out behind the livery with the horses when, down by Abernathy's, something moved that had no business moving. No lantern. Men go without a lantern when they'd rather not be seen going. 2 of them, maybe a third, quick along the dark side of the inn where the guest rooms were. In and gone. I stood in the dark and ran the arithmetic on that, same as I'd run it on everything else that day. Then I did the thing I'd done all day long. I went back to my blankets and let it belong to somebody else, and told myself she'd chosen it when she stepped down off that stage. She'd learn in the morning what they had left her. I already knew it wouldn't be kind. I told myself I only went to look. Morning found me at Abernathy's door before I'd fairly decided to walk there, which is a thing a man's feet will manage while the rest of him is pretending otherwise. The town was up and about its small business, and not one soul so much as glanced at the inn, which told me the town already knew. A place learns quick what it's safer not to see. The trouble was upstairs. Mrs. Abernathy stood in the hall outside the open door of the corner room, with a dish towel wrung to a rope in her hands, and she gave me one look with a whole history folded into it, and stepped aside to let me by. They'd been thorough in the way that has nothing to do with searching. The tick was hauled off the bed and slit down its length. Her trunk stood open with the tray dumped out, and her things, a few good dresses, a brush, a ribbon of letters, lay strewn and walked on, one dress torn down its seam by hand, which is work, which takes wanting to. Whatever they told each other they came for, the mess was the point. The point was for her to stand in it. She was at the window with her back to the wreck of it, and when she turned she had the paper in her hand. She came and put it in mine without a word, which was not what I'd braced for. I'd expected her undone. She wasn't. She'd gone somewhere past that, into the cold, clear country on the far side of being afraid, where a person turns very calm and very easy to misjudge. Block letters, pressed hard enough to score the sheet. Take the stage or join him. No name on it. It didn't want one. I read it and knew two things in the same breath. That Dolan had judged her worth the trouble of frightening, and that whoever set down the word him knew exactly where him was lying, same as I did. You told me there wasn't a second answer, she said. There's one now. Somebody wrote it on that paper. My Thomas didn't leave a debt behind, or a claim, or some other woman. He found a thing in this town worth doing that. She tipped her head at the ruin of the room. And worth doing worse to him. You know it. You knew it last night when you sent me to the stage. Her voice never lifted. I'm done asking the town. I'm asking you. And if the answer's no, say it plain, and I'll go ask the next man, and the one after him, until this place runs clean out of doorways. Everything I built in 3 years said the one word, and the word was no. Not because I doubted her, because I believed her down to the ground. I knew the exact shape of the thread she wanted to pull, and I'd seen what tore loose the last time a man pulled it. And I'd left a town and a name and a brother behind me rather than keep my hand on it. So I did the coward's arithmetic. I named a price I reckoned she couldn't cover. Help that keeps you breathing doesn't come cheap, I said. A man puts himself between you and Dolan, he'll want paying, and more than you're carrying in that case. So there's your answer after all, same as it was. It didn't take, because I'd let myself forget Mrs. Abernathy was still in the doorway. She stepped into the room. From her apron pocket she drew a small cloth roll, and she unrolled it on the bare boards of the bed. And there was coin in it. Not much, the counted, careful sort a woman lays by over years, against a hard winter or a burying. She pushed it across the sliptick toward me. That's the whole of what I have, she said. It'll answer for your price. Her voice stayed level. My boy asked the wrong questions in this town 2 summers gone. I know how the sheriff replies to letters. So you take her coin and mine, Jessie McGrath, and you keep this one on the right side of the dirt. And here she looked at me the way my own mother might have, had I let her live long enough to be ashamed of me. Or you don't. But if she ends where my son ended, you'll carry that it was yours to stop. The coin sat there on the bare tick, hers and the girl's together, and it was the smallest heap of money I ever watched shame a man out of the last thing he owned, which was the right to stay out of a thing. I picked it up. I didn't count it. Counting it would have made it a wage, and it was no wage. I put it in my coat, and it rode there the rest of that day like a stone I'd agreed to carry up a hill. Pack whatever they left worth carrying, I said to Evelyn. If your Thomas turned up something, he turned it up before he ever walked into town wearing it on his face. A man like that keeps a place outside the walls. Did he take a cabin? A claim? Anything past the fence line? Something moved in her face then. Whatever it was, it had cost her too much to pass for hope. It looked more like a woman finding the first foothold and trying her weight on it. "A cabin," she said. "He sent me the way to it. North, past the fork of the creek." "Then that's where we start." I set my hat. "We ride while there's light, and you do as I tell you out there, when I tell it, or I bring you back and put you on the stage with my own hands." She packed fast and square-cornered, which I marked and left unremarked. Inside the hour, we had 2 horses out of the livery and the town falling away behind us, and Cinder Wash watched us go the way it watched all things, from behind its glass, committing to nothing out loud. I'd spent 3 years learning to keep my hand off the one thread in this country I knew better than to pull. It had taken her 2 days and 1 torn dress to wind it clean around my fist. We rode north, toward the creek fork, toward whatever her Thomas had been fool enough to find. The cabin sat 2 hours north, past the fork of the creek, alone on a shelf of ground with a stand of cottonwoods at its back, and nothing in front of it but grass gone brown. Whitfield had chosen it well, for a man wanting to stay out of a town's eye, far enough off the road that nobody passed it by accident. She rode badly and didn't say so. The saddle worked at her the whole way, and by the last mile she was sitting careful of herself and breathing through it, and not once did she ask to rest or make a sound about it. I'd taken her for the complaining kind. She wasn't, and I filed that with the other things about her I hadn't planned on carrying. The cabin door stood open a hand's width, hung off-plumb on a strained hinge, and that told me most of the story before we were down out of the saddles. Someone had come and gone, and not gently, and a good while back. The dust had drifted level again across the sill. "Behind me," I said, and drew, and went in first. It was her room's story told larger. What furniture the man had owned was tipped over and broken into. A shelf of books lay spilled and spine-cracked across the floor. They'd gone through his whole small life after one thing, found it or quit, and then done what these people always did, left the wreck itself as the message, so that whoever came next would take the meaning plain. But they'd missed a thing. Men in a hurry generally do. I've searched rooms for my keep, in another life. You learn where a careful man puts what he can't afford to lose, and it is never the mattress, or the loose brick every fool checks first. It is low, and it is dull, and it is somewhere a person would have to mean to look. I shoved the overturned table aside and got down on the boards and went along them with the flat of my hand until one answered wrong under the heel of it. A breath of hollow where the rest rang solid. The board came up on my knife. In the space beneath, no bigger than a Bible, lay a packet wrapped in oilcloth. And I'll own it went through me a little, because I keep my own last thing in oilcloth. And for the length of a breath, the 2 hiding places were the same hiding place. I handed it up. It was hers to open. She unfolded it, kneeling there in the ruin of the man she'd come to marry. And inside were papers, maps with lines inked across them, deeds, a column of names and figures set down in a careful hand. I didn't need to read a word to take the shape of it. It was land. All of it was land. "What is it?" she said. "Trouble worth killing a man over," I said. "We read it somewhere that isn't here. Fold it up and put it away." We didn't get to leave clean. The horses came to me before the men did, hooves in the cottonwoods, easy and unhurried, the walk of men who believe the work's been done for them. I put Evelyn back through the door with the flat of my hand and stepped out to meet them, because the one thing you never do is let that kind choose the moment. It went quick. It always does when one side still thinks it's a conversation. The first came down off his horse talking, some easy remark about the lady and her papers, and got half of it out before I was inside his reach. A man who's worn a gun his whole grown life quits thinking of it as the first tool and learns it's the last. And up close there are faster things than a draw. I used a faster thing. He went down and did not get up. The second had more sense. He went for iron. But sense is slow when it's startled, and he was startled, because nothing in 3 years had taught this valley to be careful of me. I corrected the oversight. When it was done, I was breathing hard, and he was in the dirt with an arm that wouldn't steady a gun again for a long while. And I let him keep the arm, and his horse, and his life, on the one condition that he carry all 3 a long way from here, fast. He took the terms. I came around ready to find her white and shaking in the doorway. She wasn't in the doorway. She'd come out at my back with a broken chair leg gripped in both hands, cocked to swing. And when it was over, she let it down, slow. Her eyes went to the man on the ground and held there a moment, held on what a body looks like put down in the dirt, which is a sight most people can't stop themselves from turning from, and then came back to me level. She didn't ask whether I'd killed him. She took her stock of it the way you take stock and said, "There'll be more." "There's always more," I said. And I held on her a beat past what I'd meant to, and revised a figure I'd set down about her the first day, out on that porch. We put ground between us and the cabin before we stopped, out where a man could see anyone coming from a long way. And there she spread the papers across a flat rock in the last of the light, and we bent over them together. The maps were of parcels all down the valley, the bottomland along the water, the only ground worth having in a dry country. And the deeds ran with them. Land signed over from one name to the next, settler after settler handing off to the same short handful of buyers. Beside the names sat those figures, and they were the wrong shape for prices. Too small, too even, the shape of some other kind of paying. None of that was the part that turned me cold. The part that turned me cold was the stamp. Every deed carried it. The county's mark, the clerk's hand, the signature that turns a lie into a title and makes the whole country agree to it. I sat back on my heels. Somewhere in me, a door I'd nailed shut 3 years back had started working at its hinges. "These are titles," she said, reading slow. "Land titles. But that means—" She stopped, and I watched her get there. "Who makes a title good? Who makes it the law?" "The county does. The land office. The court." My own voice came out flat. "That's the trouble with what your Thomas dug up, Evelyn. It isn't a crime you carry to the law. It is the law. The same star you won't trust is the star that swore every one of these deeds true." She was quiet with it a while, with what it is to stand in a place where the thing you'd run to for help is the thing that's hunting you. "Then we don't take it to them," she said. "No." "Then who?" I didn't have that answer for her yet. But figures like those get kept fuller somewhere, in a ledger, in a room a careful thief is sure no one will ever think to open. And I had a bad notion of where a man in this valley would put a thing he never meant found. I looked north, past her shoulder, toward the hills where the old work stood rotting, and wished to God I didn't. The country changed as we climbed toward the hills, the grass giving out to rock and scrub, the trail thinning until it was more a suggestion than a road. I kept us off the ridgelines and down in the folds where we wouldn't stand against the sky, and she took my lead without needing it said twice. which was one more thing for the account I'd stopped pretending I wasn't keeping. She'd quit being only cargo somewhere back at that cabin. She asked questions now, and good ones, about the country, about how far, about Dolan. And I answered the ones that cost nothing and let the others lie. Once she asked me straight how a man came to know a town's whole rotten workings the way I did, without being a part of them. I told her you learn a lot about a house from standing on its porch long enough. She looked at me like she knew that for the dodge it was, and let me keep it. She was getting the feel of which of my silences to push and which to leave be. They took us in the narrows, where the trail pinched between a rockfall and a long drop, and this time there were 3. I'd half looked for it. The man I'd let ride off from the cabin had a mouth and a horse, and word travels cheap in a place like that. I got the first 2 sorted, which is no boast. Men who ambush for wages aren't much once the ambush quits working, and these came in loud and close and made it simple. The third I lost because a horse went down screaming between us, and for 3 bad seconds the dust took her out of my sight. When it thinned, she had her own trouble in hand. He'd caught her from behind, an arm hauled across her, dragging her back off her feet toward his horse, and she was not screaming, and she was not going soft in his grip. She drove her elbow back into him, short and hard, up under the ribs where it steals the wind, and when his hold slacked on the hurt of it, she dropped. Not away from him, but down toward the ground, toward a stone the size of a fist she'd already marked for herself. And she came up with it and put it into the side of his face with the whole of her shoulder behind it. Something gave that wasn't the stone. He turned her loose to hold his own head, and she stepped back out of his reach with the rock still in her fist, in case he wanted the rest of it. He didn't. I put a shot past his ear to make the lesson keep, and he found his horse and his friend's good example, and was gone. I don't rightly know what I'd expected. To find her needing pulling out of it. To do the pulling, and have it be the same grim sum as always, one more soul leaning on me who'd pay for it in the end. Instead, she stood over a man she put down with her own hands, and she looked at me with the question already answered in her face, and I holstered a gun I hadn't needed and swallowed the thing that came to me, that I'd read her wrong from the porch on the first afternoon, and was going to go on reading her wrong, it seemed, the whole way down. She wiped her hands on the ruin of her skirt. The only remark she made on any of it was, "You could have warned me they'd use the narrows." "You'd have done the same either way," I said, which was as close as I'd come yet to telling her what I'd started to think of her. We made a mean little camp that night in a cut in the rocks where a small fire wouldn't throw its light far, and for a good while neither of us had anything to spend on words. She sat in close to the flames with her arms about her knees, and I built the fire up a touch past what it needed, on her side of it, and didn't say why. And she didn't ask, but she put her hands out to the warmth of it and left them there. "You had people," she said, after a long stretch of it. Not a question. She'd built it out of something, the way I'd worked those boards at the cabin maybe, or only the particular quiet of a man who's had practice at going quiet. Once. What happened to them? I let the fire do what fire does and turned over how much of the truth I owed a woman who'd bought my help with a dead boy's burying money. I had a place, I said, in the end. A thing I was good at. People who counted on my being good at it. The words came slow, and I let them come slow. And there was a day I learned I wasn't the man I'd told them all I was. So I set it down and walked off, and I've been walking since. That's as much of it as you need." She let me keep the rest, the way I'd let her push and not push all that day. Then she gave me a little of her own, maybe because it comes easier to hand a thing to somebody who's just handed you one. "I wasn't running to Thomas," she said. That's the story back home. Poor girl, no prospects, posted herself west to the first man who'd write back. It wasn't so. She turned it over careful. The East had my whole life settled already, who I'd be, how small a room I'd live it in. Thomas wrote like a man who believed a person could still choose. That's what I crossed the country for. The door, more than the man standing in it. She near smiled at the flames. He'd laugh to hear me put it that way. He always said I wanted the frontier worse than I wanted him. And there it was, the thing I carried, set down across the fire from her while she spoke of what was coming in the present tense. He'd laugh, he always said. Like the man was off walking a fence line and would be in by dark. I had it in my mouth, the truth, or the near-shore shape of it. She'd earned it. She'd put a man in the dirt that day to keep moving toward it. And every mile of this was carrying her nearer the ground he was already under. And the decent thing, the thing a better man does, was to say it here, tonight, by a fire, soft, before the country said it to her some harder way. I looked at her face in the firelight, with a little of that future still on it, and I said nothing, again. I told myself I didn't know it for certain. I told myself a great many things that night. "Sleep," I said, rougher than I'd meant it. "We make the old works by midday. If your Thomas hid the rest of it anywhere, it's up there, and so is whoever Dolan keeps watching the place." She lay down on the far side of the fire, and I took the first watch, and I sat with her breath going slow and even at my back, and the truth going nowhere at all. And I kept my eyes on the dark for the kind of trouble I understood, instead of the kind I didn't. The dark never gave me anything to point a gun at, and by the grey end of the watch, that had stopped feeling like luck. I woke her when there was light enough to ride by. She came up out of sleep, the way she'd taken to doing everything, all at once and already moving, one hand finding the saddlebag with the papers before it found her own face. 4 hours on cold ground with a dead man's business for a pillow, and she looked at me across the ash like she was braced to hear we'd thrown the night away for nothing. "Coffee'd be a kindness," she said. "It'd also be a fire, and a fire's a flag on open ground." I kicked dirt over the ash. You can have it cold and be alive to complain, or hot and be found. She didn't complain. I was learning that about her. She saved it, spent it careful, like a woman down to her last coins. We rode up out of the flat toward the hills, and the country turned mean under us. The grass gave out. The ground went to shale and broken rock, the trail thinning to a rumour a horse had to be argued onto, step by step, the drop falling away on the left, and nothing on the right but more rock going up. She rode it badly and said nothing about riding it badly, and I come around to reading that for what it was. The not saying cost her more than the saddle did. Mid-morning we let the horses blow in the shade of a rock face, and she took the oilcloth packet out and spread Thomas's papers across her knee and went at them again, the way a tongue keeps going back to a broken tooth. She'd been working them in pieces since the cabin. Now she wanted the whole shape of it at once. "The same 4 names," she said, tapping the deeds. "Here and here and here. Every good parcel in the valley bottom, the land with the water on it, and every last title runs to 4 men. I sat in that town 3 days and never once heard those names spoken. You wouldn't have. They don't drink where old Pruitt sweeps. But look. She turned a deed to the light, her finger under a line of figures. Here's a man's whole quarter section, his water, his house, the years he broke his back on it. And here's the price he took for it. Nobody sells for this, Jessie. It's a beggar's sum, and it's even. The same round figure, over and over, down the whole page. Land doesn't cost the same as the next piece of land. Nothing does. No, I said, it doesn't. I looked at the figure she was holding up, and it told me the rest without asking me to turn the page. That's not a price. A price is 2 men arguing till they're both a little sore. That's a number somebody wrote in a box because a number had to go there. Nobody bought. Nobody sold. Somebody just made a paper that says they did. She was quiet a moment, working it. Then it isn't real. A forgery. We show it to a court and... Show it to which court? It came out of me harder than I'd meant. She looked up. I kept my eyes on the paper. Turn it over, down at the bottom, that mark pressed into it. That's the county seal. That's the thing that makes a lie true. It doesn't matter what happened on that land or didn't. Once that seal's on the deed is the truth. And the man farming the ground is a squatter on paper that's got the whole weight of the law standing behind it. I knew too much about that seal. I heard it in my own voice and couldn't stop it. The way a man talks about a thing he once had reason to trust from the inside before he learnt what it went for. She was watching me now, not the paper, and I gave her the rest before the question could finish forming behind her eyes. A seal like that means a man signed for it, a judge or near enough. And a judge who'll press his seal to 4 names, swallowing a whole valley for that kind of money. He got paid. Somewhere there's a page that says how much. That's what your Thomas was after. Not the deeds. He had the deeds. He wanted the page that shows the money going the other way, up the ladder, to the men who make the lie legal. She folded the deeds back into the oilcloth, slow, like they'd turned to something that could cut her. So there's no one, she said, not asking, settling it in herself. The sheriff's the thief. The judge is bought. The seal that ought to protect a man is the knife in him. I came out here thinking I'd walk into a courthouse with all of this, and someone in a black coat would... She stopped. There's no one to take it to. There's no one to take it to, I agreed. There's only taking it. She looked at me then, and something in her face had gone past scared and out the far side of it, into a country I knew because I'd lived there a long time. The flat, cold place a person reaches when the last door they'd been counting on turns out to have been nailed shut before they ever came looking. It's an ugly place. It also gets things done when nothing softer will. Then we take it, she said. Then we take it. But not with what's in that packet. Deeds and a seal only prove the lies tidy. We need the other page, what got paid and into whose hand. And a thing like that doesn't sit in a cabin north of the creek. I put the horse back toward the trail. It gets kept somewhere a man like Dolan can watch, somewhere already his. The old works. The old works. We climbed the rest of that morning without much said, and there wasn't the need for much. Some kinds of company you have to fill with talk. This had quit being that somewhere back down the trail, and I hadn't marked the moment it changed, which is how those moments always get past me. Then the hills opened, and the old works came up out of the waste. I'd known it was there. Knowing did little against the sight of it. It sat in a bowl of tailings the colour of an old bruise, the earth turned wrong side up and left to die. No grass, no green, just grey heaps and the black bones of the head frames leaning on the sky, and below them the mouths of the shafts, timbered once, caved now, dark running back into the mountain like something had taken a bite and not swallowed. Whatever men had torn out of that ground, they'd torn the life out with it and moved on. It didn't look abandoned. Abandoned is a house waiting on somebody to come back. This looked like a thing that had been used all the way up and then thrown down, and it sat in the noon light, not waiting on anybody, patient the way a dry well is patient. Somewhere in that ruin was the page that could hang a sheriff, and somewhere in it, if I'd read Dolan right, were the eyes he kept on the place. "Stay close," I said, "and step where I step." And we rode down into it. When put the horses in behind a fallen head frame where the open ground couldn't see them, and I stood a while before I let us go a step further, listening. A dead place has a sound to it, and a place with a man in it has another, and I wanted to be sure which one I was standing in before I put my back to any of it. Wind in the timber, a loose sheet of iron somewhere, ticking. Nothing that breathed. "There," I said, and pointed her at the one building the hill hadn't taken back. The rest had gone to the weather, roofs sprung, walls leaning into one another like drunks holding a man up. But this one still had a door on it, square and shut. A door still on its hinges, in a place where everything else had been left to rot, told me somebody kept coming to close it. That was the arithmetic of it. You don't hang a door on a corpse. Inside it was dim and dry and smelled of old paper and older dust. Whatever it had been, a mine office, an assay room, the company men had stripped it when they pulled out and left the shelves bare and the floor swept. All but the crates. 6 of them along the back wall, stencilled with the name of whatever outfit had gutted the hill and gone under. The letters worn to shadow, only, and Development Company, still holding on the nearest. Old crates, new marks. Somebody had pried these open and closed them again, and not long since. The wood was pale where the bar had bitten under the lids. I got the top one open. Ledgers, the big county kind, the sort meant to sit in a courthouse under a clerk's hand, and here they were stacked 6 deep in a dead mine. Evelyn came up at my shoulder. I handed her one and took another, and for a while there was no sound in that room but the 2 of us turning pages. I'd kept books once, read them anyway, the way you learn to read a man's face for the things sitting behind it. I knew what a book looked like when it was telling the truth. I knew the other kind too, kept careful, summed clean, every line squared, and a lie in good handwriting all the way through. This was the second kind. And running down the margins in a smaller hand was a second set of figures that had no business in a land office at all. Money going out, not coming in. A sum. Beside it, a set of initials. Beside that, a date. The same initials, month on month, the better part of 2 years of them. Money lifted off the top of the pile and carried into one pocket over and over again. "Jessie?" Her voice had dropped into the register I'd learned to mind. She turned her book to me, her finger under a name set down in full. Not initials, a name, with an office written after it. The kind of office that presses a seal into a deed and makes the deed true. Beside the name, a figure. beside the figure, in that same small hand, Land Office, keep it quiet, C.D. That's the judge, she said. That's the judge. I told her, back on the trail, that we needed the page showing the money run the other way. Here it was, and not one page, but a mine full of them. The whole machine written down in its own hand, kept because a man like Dolan trusts paper further than he trusts the men he buys, and can't make himself burn the one thing that proves he owns them. It would put a rope around him and his judge both, if it ever reached a hand clean enough to hold it. That should have been the whole of what I felt. The snare pulled tight, the clean cold of a thing finally done. But a snare pulled tight has a second half to it. It fetches the man who set it at a run. I told her to pack what she could carry, and I went to the door and stood at the crack of it, looking out over the tailings and the dead grey heaps, and the wind, and nothing. Nothing for a long count. And then, high up on the shoulder of the far ridge, where a man could sit a horse and hold the whole bowl of the works in his eye, a horse, standing. And on it, small at that reach, but plain in the way it did not move, a rider who had been up there long enough to have watched us come down. He wasn't coming for us. That was the worst of it. A man who means to take you comes down out of the high ground. A man who sits and looks his fill, and then turns his horse the way this one now turned his, and dropped off the back of the ridge and was gone. That man has no intention of fighting you. He is going to go and tell the ones who will. We're finished here, I said. It came out flat. Bring what you've got, and we don't leave the way we came in. She didn't spend breath asking why. She'd learned that too. We took what the saddlebags would hold, the books that named the judge, the pages with the paying out down their margins, and left the rest where it sat, because a horse carries only so much, and a living body needs to move. I brought us around toward the low end of the works, where the ground fell away toward a thin line of stunted trees, the only cover for a mile, meaning to slip us out under it and lose whatever came behind us in the broken country past. That was when I saw it. Down at the tree line, in among the first of the timber where the shade began, a patch of ground that did not match the ground around it. Everything up there was grey and packed and long dead. This was dark. Turned. A low rectangle of earth that had been opened and filled back in, and filled not long ago. You could tell because the dirt hadn't yet gone the colour of everything it lay among. I knew the shape of it. A man doesn't have to be told. It is the one shape the ground makes that means only the one thing. Jessie, she said. What is that? She'd stopped her horse without my telling her to. And I think she already knew. Maybe she'd known since the stage first rolled in, the same as I had. Because she didn't ask it twice. She swung down when I swung down. We crossed the dead grey ground together, towards the one dark seam in all of it, and it held its shape the whole way, and the shape never softened into anything a person could stand to hope it was. Xavier was short. I took that in before I could stop it, the way you take in how many men are in a room before you take in a single face. Short for a grown man laid out proper, which meant they'd worked in a hurry, or hadn't cared, or had decided a fellow who rode out here asking after other men's deeds wasn't worth the length of a whole grave. Then I made myself quit the counting. There are things a man teaches himself to read that he'd give a good deal to unlearn, and that was one of them. And Evelyn was already past me anyway. At the near edge, where the turned dirt met the old packed grey, the ground had given a few things back. Whoever filled the hole had gone through his pockets first and been careless with what he didn't want, and some weather since had worked the leavings half up to the light. a comb, a collar stud gone green, a watch, face down, its chain run into the dirt like a root. She knelt in front of it, not fainting. I've seen women faint and it isn't that. She went down on purpose, both hands flat to the earth, like she meant to keep it from tipping, and she turned the watch over with 2 fingers. I didn't have to be told whose it was. I couldn't have said myself. I never once saw the man draw breath. But I knew it the way you know a shot's gone home before the body drops, by the thing that leaves. Something left her. She held the watch up to the flat light, and her mouth moved and made nothing, and then she folded down over her own knees with it caught under her chin, and the sound came then. Low, not loud, the kind that costs more than screaming ever does. So there it was. I'd known it, or near enough to call it knowing, since the stage first came up the road with her small and straight on the seat of it, asking after Whitfield in a town that ate men and kept quiet about the meal. I'd known it in the sheriff's flat mouth, and the boy who wouldn't lift his eyes, and the block letters that said, "Join him." I'd carried the knowing around unspoken, the kind of weight you don't put down because putting it down means turning and looking straight at it, and I'd said none of it. Not one word. Because the first word would have meant she'd turn and ask me how I came to know, and I hadn't a clean answer in me to give her. So I let her hope. Day laid on day, and I watched her hope, and kept my teeth shut on it, and called that mercy, and it wasn't mercy. It was that I never had the nerve to be the man who told her. The ground told her instead, "It'll do the job you won't." I went down beside her. There was no deciding in it. I got into the dirt at her side, and she turned into me without checking to see who it was. She knew. And I put my arms around her and held on while she came apart, and I said nothing, because for once in a sorry life, I understood there was nothing to say that wouldn't be for my sake and not for hers. She shook. I held her. The watch was pressed between us, cold, still ticking or long stopped. I never looked. The wind came off the dead heaps and moved the stunted trees over the grave, and for a long while that was the only other thing in the world that moved. When the worst of it had run through her, she raised her head. Her face was wrecked, and it was close to mine, and she didn't turn it off, and I didn't. And what was between us was no distance at all. She kissed me, or I kissed her. I've never been able to hang it on the one of us, and I've quit trying. It wasn't sweet, and it wasn't meant for sweet. It tasted of salt. It was grief hunting a place to put itself down and settling on the nearest living warmth. And it was, God forgive the both of us, the other thing too, the thing I'd been refusing to give a name to for days because the name would cost more than I had on me. Her fist knotted in my coat. I held my hand flat and easy against her back, like I had a hold of something that would break if I closed my grip. It didn't last. It didn't need to. When she drew back an inch, we stayed put, heads bowed together, trading the same air over a dead man's grave, and neither of us made it into a lie, and neither of us said aloud what it had been. "I came out here for a door," she said, after. Her voice was ruined and it was steady, which was the worse of the two. Not for him. I told myself so the whole way, that it was the wide country I was after, and he was only the way through the wall to it. She pressed the watch flat between her palms. "It doesn't make this any smaller. I thought it might. It doesn't." "No," I said. "It doesn't work that way." I could have handed her the rest of it then. I could have said the thing that would have set me square, that I'd known, or as good as, and let her go on hoping past all sense. I owed her that word, and I felt the owing sit down in my chest and glow like a coal a man swallowed. But her fellow was 3 feet under, and she was leaning her weight on me, and a confession right there would only have been me passing her my load to hold on top of her own. So I kept it. One more thing I didn't say. I was getting to be a whole town of things I hadn't said. She let me bring her up onto her feet. We stood over the grave with our hats in our hands, and she set the watch back down at the head of it, worked into the dirt. And that surprised me, and then it didn't. She was never a woman to keep a thing only for the keeping of it. For a little while we only stood. It was quiet. The kind of quiet a country holds in the last minutes before it comes for you. The flat, waiting stillness of a sky making up its mind. Because an hour back a man had sat the far ridge and watched us come down into all of it, and turned his horse, and by now our names were riding towards Cinder Wash in his mouth, and every word he carried would put more men on this ground, and not fewer. I let her have the quiet as long as I dared. It wasn't long. But I gave her what there was of it, standing myself between her and the open country, with my hand not quite laid against the small of her back, and for the length of it neither of us moved, and neither of us named the thing we'd done. And the dead man lay easy under the 3 feet of that whole poisoned bowl that anybody had troubled to turn soft. We didn't linger past the length of that quiet. I got her up onto her horse and climbed after, slow, and we left the works behind and dropped down out of the bruised bowl of it into open country, scrub and dry wash running off toward the broken ground, and past that, in theory, towards some roof or other. The sun sat low and threw our shadows a long way out in front of us, 2 thin riders, and no third thing moving in all that emptiness. Which should have been a comfort, and wasn't. The first shot I didn't take for a shot. What came first was the blow. Something hit me high in the left shoulder, like a fence rail swung full-armed, and it turned me half around in the saddle before I'd caught up to the fact of it, and my arm quit me. Just quit. Went heavy and stupid and hot all at once, the reins spilling out of a hand that wouldn't answer. Then the flat crack of it came off the rocks to tell me what had already happened, and then a second, kicking dirt where my horse had stood astride before. "Down! Get down and ride!" Evelyn was already low over her horse's neck, already reaching for me. I couldn't have told you where it came from. A wash, a stand of rock off the right, somewhere with cover, and that was the whole of the cover in that country, and they'd had the wit to take it and sit in it and let us walk out into the open the way you'd wait on a lit doorway. They weren't riders come to close with us. They were guns behind rock, and that was a different animal from the ones we'd met, and it meant the watcher had run his errand, and the men Dolan sent this time hadn't come to talk. I got my good hand into the mane and held. She took my reins up with the horn of her own and hauled both horses around, and we ran. I've run from a fair number of things in my life, and I never ran like that. Half over the neck, one arm dead and wet and slapping loose, the ground coming up sideways every time the horse changed its lead, and her voice somewhere at my ear saying, "Stay on, stay on, stay with me," and me trying to, and not sure I was managing it. We lost them in the broken ground, or they let us go, or I only quit hearing them. Somewhere in there, the country began coming apart at the edges. The lights went wrong, too bright, and then not bright enough. The wet down my side had gone from hot to cold, and there was a great deal of it, more than a man keeps in reserve. She had us stopped once, quick, her hand doing something hard at my shoulder with a wadded cloth, her face close and white and fixed, saying my name in a voice that had a floor under it and nothing above the floor. I wanted to tell her the floor was the right place to stand. I don't think I got it out. I don't think I said much that held together. "Where?" she said. "Jessie, there's nothing out here. Where do I take you? There was one place. I'd known it the whole ride, and I'd have bled dry sooner than name it if the choosing had been mine alone, because it was a door I had shut myself 3 years back, with a town and a name laid on the far side of it, and I had sworn the plain private oath a man swears in his own chest, that I'd die on open ground before I'd go stand on that step with my hand out. I gave her the way to it anyway. Fever's an honest thing. It spends the coin pride would hoard. I told her the line of hills to hold to and the fork to take, and the name that went with the place, and I heard the name come out of me, Caleb, like it had been issued to some other man, and she didn't ask who he was. She only turned us for the hills. The ride after that comes back in pieces, the way a bad night does when you've been fever deep in it, the dark coming down full, the cold working into the wet and then past it, into me. Her hand twisted into the back of my collar, hauling me upright each time I listed, and under it, a low, steady murmur she never let stop. Not words I could keep, only the sound of a person deciding out loud that you were going to live whether or not you got a say. Stars I couldn't hold still. A creek, the horses loud in the crossing of it. Her saying almost, once, from a long way off. And then a light. One window, low and yellow, a single lamp in a house set black against the rise of a hill. I knew the shape of it before my eyes could make it plain. I'd carried it 3 years and never once turned to face it. The low roof, the pole corral, the hard, mean order of a man who'd built the whole of what he had out of spite and staying put. Home to no one I had any right to go to. The one door in that country I could not knock on, and the only one inside the reach of a man still breathing. She got us into the yard. I don't know how she brought me down out of the saddle. I know the ground took my knees, and her shoulder came in under my good arm, and she was smaller than the work, and did it regardless. She was already at the door, striking it with the flat of her hand and calling through it, "Open up, please, a man's been shot, please," while I hung on her and watched the seam of yellow under the door, and waited on it the way you wait on a verdict read out slow. The door opened. He filled it, bigger than I'd allowed myself to keep him, the lamp at his back dropping his face into shadow, but I'd have known the set of those shoulders in the black at the bottom of a well. 3 years, and the first thing my brother did was go still as struck stone. The second was to look, at the arm, at the blood, at the ruin the night had set down on his doorstep, and whatever had been in his face folded shut, slow, like a hand closing to a fist. "No," Caleb said, quiet. Not a question, not a curse, just the one flat word, his hand still riding the edge of the door like he'd sooner shut it. "Not you. You don't get to turn up here and do your dying on my step." Evelyn moved in front of me toward him, and I felt the last of it start to go, the yard tilting up slow and soft, and her voice began, low and level, and with no fear in it at all, into the space that one word had left open. I never heard what she said. The light drew down to a thread, and the thread went out. I came back to the world the way you come up through deep water, in pushes, none of them mine, each one setting me a little higher than I wanted to be. Lamplight, coal oil and boiled cloth, and something bitter under it, iodine or worse. A pressure on my left side that hadn't turned to pain yet, a hand bearing down hard enough to keep me from drifting off the table. Then the pain caught the hand up, and I knew the room by the size of what was hurting me. Caleb had my shirt off and the shoulder open to the lamp, and he was working it with a rag and a slim iron probe, and no gentleness in him at all. The way you dig a splinter out of a post you meant to go on using. I made a sound. It wasn't a word. I hadn't the price of a word yet. His eyes came up to mine, held half a breath, went back to the wound. Lie still, or I'll have her sit on you. He didn't have her name and wouldn't ask for it. It's in the meat, missed the bone. You'll keep the arm if you don't fight me for it. He said it to the wound, a report owed to nobody, and bore down again, and the room whited out at its edges and let go. When it came back, Evelyn was against the far wall past the lamp, upright, her sleeves gone dark to the elbow with what had come out of me on the ride. She brought me here. I had that much straight, even fevered. She'd taken my reins on her own horn and hauled us around and run, held me up in the saddle by a fist in my collar, and got me down off the horse at the end when I couldn't have done it for money. But the size of it I could only now pick up and hold, and it weighed more than I liked owing anyone alive. Caleb worked a long while without talking. He'd always had the hands. It was the rest of him that had gone to flint. He pat the hole and wound it tight, and never let his face soften into a thing a man could thank him for. "Don't take this for welcome," he said at last, knotting the cloth off. "I'd have done the same for a hurt dog somebody left on the step. Less noise from the dog." He wiped the probe on his knee. "First light, you're both gone, and it counts for nothing between us. You hear that? Nothing changes here." My saddlebags had come in with me, her doing, or his, hauled off the horse before it was led away. They sat by the door with the near flap fallen open, and the thing I keep in oilcloth had worked halfway out of it in all the running, the way a thing you never look at will choose its worst hour to be seen. He saw it before I could get my tongue to stop him. He crossed and picked it up and didn't unwrap it. He'd have known the weight of it blind, the shape under the cloth. He stood with it closed in his fist and looked at me across it, and for the first time since the door, there was something in his face besides the shut of it. Still carrying the damn thing. Quiet. 3 years. Couldn't wear it, couldn't set it down, just hauled it round the territory in a rag like a bone you hadn't the stomach to bury. Nothing in him rose. That was the cruelty of it, that none of it needed to rise. "You want to tell her what it is, or does it fall to me?" Evelyn had not moved, but her looking had weight in it now, and it was on me, not on him, and I kept my eyes on the boards of the ceiling because I hadn't the strength to go and meet it. He set it on the table, careful, like it might yet be worth something, which was its own turn of the knife. "He wore a star," he said, to her, to the room. "2 counties south. Good at it. Better than good. The kind of good that makes a town go lazy, because why fret with him standing in the road? And then a day came it went wrong on him, the way that work goes wrong, and men he'd given his word to were in the ground. And instead of standing in it and answering, he saddled a horse in the dark and rode. Left the star. Left the town. Left what was his to carry. One muscle moved at his jaw, the only place it showed. Turned up here a week on, with that in a rag, and not one word in his mouth worth the hearing, and rode off again when I wouldn't take him in. That's the man bleeding on my table, miss. Whatever he told you he was the law once, and he ran from it." The room held it. There wasn't a word in the whole of it I could call a lie. And underneath ran the other thing, the cold one Caleb had no way to name, that a man had come to Cinder Wash a season back, asking the questions that put you in the ground, and somewhere in his papers he'd set it down that if it turned bad, there was a man out in this country who carried a star and didn't wave it about, a man the sheriff could never be, and that was the man to trust. Whitfield had been told to find me, never knew my face, went into the dark ground still looking for a man who'd been sitting the same town the whole time, a badge and a rag in his saddlebag, telling the man's own promised woman that the only star in Cinder Wash rode on Dolan's chest. I'd said that to her face. It came back on me now, with her stood right there to see the shape of what the saying had cost. Caleb went out, to the horses, to be under any roof but this one with what he'd laid down. The quiet he left behind was worse than the talk had been. Evelyn came and sat where he'd worked, close, and didn't put a hand on me. I was glad of it, and I wasn't. "You'll want to be on that stage he keeps naming," I said. Level enough. First light. Both roads run out of this county at the rim. Take the one Dolan isn't watching. That's the second man tonight to tell me to leave. Dry, not hurt. The first one wrote it on a wall. The first one had it right. I held to the ceiling. You came out here for a door. It's still standing open. There's nothing under this roof worth staying in the county to keep, and I'm the least of it. She was still a moment. "You've settled a lot of things for me," she said, "for a man who can't lift his own arm off the table. No heat in it. The house made us all quiet tonight. You want me gone so you don't have to lie here and watch what I cost you. I know that wanting from the inside. I had it about Thomas. Right up to the hour it stopped being any use to have it." She stood. "I'll go when I decide to go. Not before dawn, and not on your say-so to keep your conscience light. Sending someone off isn't the same as saving them, Jessie. It only feels near enough from where you're lying." I didn't get to answer. Out in the dark, a horse came on at a walk, not hurrying, which was how I knew the make of it before I heard the voice, because Dolan's men never hurried. Hurry was for men who could be caught out. It stopped in the yard. Caleb's voice, low. Another over it, easy, carrying, pitched to go straight through a wall. "No trouble, rancher, just carrying word." A pause built to be waited on. "Sheriff's compliments. The woman, and whoever she's got roped to her, can be on the morning stage or clear off this range by the time the sun's up over the rim. That's the whole of the message. She rides out, or she's under the ground by noon, and the man with her, and any fool who thought to shelter the pair of them." Leather creaked as he turned the horse. "Sun up. He'll not trouble to say it a second time." Then hoofbeats going off, unhurried, and the yard fell still. And through the one low window, the black had already begun to thin along its bottom edge, the way it always starts before you're ready for it, the night grinding itself down toward the hour he'd set his name to. A man who runs keeps a ledger. What you save by leaving, set against what you leave behind. I'd balanced that column so many times I could do it in the dark. And for 3 years it had always come out telling me to go. I ran it once more, flat on Caleb's table, with the wound throbbing in time to my pulse, and the grey beginning to stand in the window. Go now, ahead of the sun, and I'd save my own skin. That was the whole of what the going saved. Set against it, Evelyn on the morning stage, with Dolan's word that the man riding with her went in the ground too, which meant the stage saved nothing at all, because a man who'd forge a county to hold his land would never let a woman who'd read his ledgers ride quietly out of it. He'd wire ahead. He'd send a rider down the line. Running had never once bought what I told myself it bought. It had only moved the dying somewhere I didn't have to stand and watch. The sum came out wrong. It had likely been coming out wrong for 3 years, and I'd kept it wrapped in a rag so I'd never have to sit down and add it. I got my legs under me. The room swam and set. The star sat where Caleb had left it, and I took it up in my good hand and stood a moment with the oilcloth in my fingers. And then I did the thing I hadn't done since the night I rode out of that other town. I unwrapped it. The tin had gone the colour of an old nail. It didn't shine. It hadn't in years. A star only means what a man will stand behind, and I'd spent 3 years proving I'd stand behind nothing. I didn't pin it on. I wasn't that man yet. But I closed my hand around the tin instead of the cloth, and that was further than I'd got in a long while. Evelyn was watching from the wall. She'd have seen it come out of the rag. She'd have set it against her dead man's letter with no help from me. She was quick that way. I owe you a thing, I said, and after I've said it, you can decide whether you still want to be standing next to me when the sun's up. The words came out rough. The day you got down off that stage and said his name, I knew. Not for certain. Certain enough. I'd watched what this town does to men who dig, and I read the whole of it in one look at you, and I said nothing. Let you go to Dolan. Let you knock on every door in the place. Let you hope. I told myself that was mercy. It wasn't. It was that I never had the sand to be the man who took the hope off you. She was quiet a while. Somewhere under the boards, the ranch dog turned over in its sleep. I've known since the grave, she said plainly. A man doesn't go that still at a name unless he's already got it buried. She didn't come to me and she didn't step away. You'd like me to hate you for it. It'd cost you less if I did. A slow breath. I don't have it to spare. I spent it. On Thomas, and on a whole town that watched him die. And there's none left over with your name on it. You'll have to make do. It was the nearest thing to forgiveness I'd been handed in 3 years, and it came out sounding like a charge laid against me, which was the only way either of us had of passing a thing like that between us. Then we don't waste the dark arguing about the stage, she said, and reached for my coat. We rode in with the grey coming up at our backs. Caleb didn't stop us, and he didn't come with us. He stood in his doorway with the lamp gone dead behind him and watched us take the creek crossing. Didn't call out goodbye or good luck or don't, just watched, which out of Caleb was as near a blessing as that morning was going to offer. Whatever was owed between us would keep, or it wouldn't. There wasn't time to find out. The town was awake ahead of us. That told me the rider had come here too, laying Donan's word down in front of himself the way you'd pour lamp oil ahead of a match. Doors that had stayed shut on Evelyn a whole week stood open a hand's width now, faces set in the gaps. Old Pruitt had quit even pretending to sweep. Halloran stood on his own porch with a shotgun broken over his forearm, aimed at nothing, just held. The way a man holds a thing to remind himself he's got hands. And Mrs. Abernathy was standing in the middle of the street. She had no gun on her. She had the ledger, the one we'd left in her keeping, the judge's name written out full beside the money running the wrong direction. And she held it open above her head, not reading from it, only turning the page to the grey light so the whole street could see there was writing on it. Her voice carried in a way I'd never have credited to a woman who ran an inn and kept her head down 2 summers straight. I didn't catch all of it. Enough. She was saying her boy's name, saying it out loud in the open road, which in Cinderwash was the one thing nobody ever did. And each time she said it, another door came open another hand's width. She'd lost him to the same paper Evelyn had bled over, and somewhere in the night she decided she would sooner stand in the road and say his name than keep it safe and quiet in her mouth till she died. That was what turned the street in the end. A grey-haired woman who would not sit down next to what was written on that page. My own part was small, and I was glad of it. I got down with my left arm hanging useless at my side and stood where the whole street could see me, the drifter they'd all learned to be afraid of, on the side of the woman and the widow. And I said the one thing I had worth the breath, that the sheriff and his bought judge could both hang on what was written on that page, if enough of us were alive at the end of the morning to carry it to a court outside this county. That was all. No more than that. It wasn't a speech. It was a sum, said out loud, the odds of the thing laid down where every man could count them for himself. You can talk a man out of courage. It comes harder to argue him out of arithmetic he's already run in his own head. By the time the sun stood a finger off the rim, we had a street. We had a handful of men with whatever they owned that would fire, strung loose along the storefronts, and more at the upper windows. And Abernathy, who would not be moved out of the middle of it, though I asked her twice. Down at the far end, Donan's men were already drifting together by the saloon, unhurried, the way they did everything in a town that had never yet given them a reason to hurry. Evelyn came up at my shoulder with a borrowed rifle held like she'd been raised to it, which she hadn't. She'd learned it inside a week, the same as she'd learned everything out here, fast and without once asking to be spared the lesson. There's a stack of things a man's supposed to say to a woman before a morning like that one. I found I didn't have them, and wouldn't have got them out if I had. What I had was her shoulder close to mine, and the cold tin in my pocket, and a street full of people who'd all decided the same impossible thing at once. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us reached for the word. We'd had a week of leaving it unsaid, and it was no morning to begin. She laid her free hand flat against my chest a moment, over the ruined shoulder, careful of it, and I put my hand over hers and held it there, and that was the whole of the goodbye. 2 hands and no words, and the light coming on. Then the sun cleared the rim and threw its hard flat glare straight down the length of the street. Both ends of it stood plain now. Dolan's men gathered at theirs, our ragged lines strung along the fronts at ours. The long, empty middle lying between, with nothing in it yet but dust and the day. First light. The hour he'd set his name to, come around at last, and every one of us still standing in it. Dolan let the light get all the way down the street before he moved. That was his way. He'd learned a long time back that the man who waits looks like the man who's already won. And in Cinderwash, he mostly had been. He stepped off the saloon boards into the open with no gun in his hand, which told me more than a drawn one would have. He didn't think he'd need it drawn. He thought the sight of him was enough, the way it had always been enough. "Long ride for a berryin'," he called down the street. His voice carried easy in the still air, pitched for the doorways as much as for me, a man performing for a town he still believed was watching him, and not the other thing. "You could have had the stage. I offered you the stage." His eyes went past me to Evelyn and came back, and something in his mouth curled. "Now I've got the both of you to put under. And whatever fools your friends here are minded to lie down beside you. Poor arithmetic, McGrath. I'd have thought a man who ran this far to keep his own hide could still count. I didn't answer him with words. I'd spent the last of mine on the ride in, and none of them had ever been meant for him. What I had left was in my pocket. I took it out with my right hand. The left had hung dead at my side since the wash, and would go on hanging there through whatever came. And I pinned it to my coat, where the length of the street could see it. 3 years it had ridden in oilcloth in my saddlebag, and gone the colour of an old nail, and it caught the morning no more than a stone would have. It didn't need to. Dolan wore a star too, kept bright on his chest. The sheriff's star, the one that had turned every lie in this valley into law. 2 of us standing in one road, wearing tin, and only ever one of us had meant a thing by it. Whitfield had gone into the ground looking for a man who wore one of these and didn't wave it about. He'd never known my face. He'd lived out his last weeks in the same town as the man he'd been told to find, and died still looking. And I was 3 years and 1 grave too late to be the smallest use to him. I pinned it on anyway. A man ought to be the thing he is before he does the last thing he's going to do. Dolan saw the tin and knew it. It didn't frighten him. Nothing did. That was the half of his trouble. It insulted him. That a washed-up star should turn up in the middle of his own street, wearing the office he'd spent years making into a joke. His hand went for his gun then, because contempt was the only thing that had ever made Dolan move first. And contempt had finally met something it couldn't stomach. After that, the street came apart all at once. I don't know who fired first, and it never mattered. The morning tore open with it, gunfire off the storefronts and down out of the upper windows. Dolan's men breaking for cover a minute after they'd been sure they'd never need any. A window went somewhere. A man screamed the short way a man screams when it's finished for him. I put the rest of it out at the edges of my sight, the way you learn to when there's just one man in a fight who's yours to answer. And mine was Dolan, and I went for him. He was fast for a big man, and he'd never once been the coward he'd decided I was. His first shot went wide and took a post. His second I never heard at all, only the wind of it went past my ear. I had one arm to do the work of 2, and a body that had been leaking since the day before, and I couldn't fan the hammer, and I couldn't do it pretty. I did it plain. I set my feet where they'd stay set, and I fired once, and the round took him low and turned him half around. And Sheriff Dolan went down onto one knee in the middle of his own street, with his bright star tipped over toward the dirt. I should have finished it. I knew the shape of finishing it, had known it a long time from the other life, the one I'd spent 3 years telling the world I'd never lived. But finishing it meant crossing the ground to him and standing over him and doing the cold, last thing, steady-handed. And I had the crossing in me and not much past it. My legs gave me 3 steps and would not give me the 4th. The gun hung heavy as an anvil off my good arm. The street tipped a quarter turn and came slowly back, and Dolan, down on his knee with his life running out the low hole I'd put in him, was reaching, his hand walking across the dirt toward the gun that had fallen from it, his eyes on me the whole way, because he'd done his counting too, and his sum said the drifter had nothing left in him. His sum was right. I didn't have it. Evelyn did. The rifle spoke once at my right shoulder. She'd come up on my good side, the way she'd stood beside me all that week without either of us saying why. And the shot got to Dolan's hand before Dolan's hand got to the gun. The reaching stopped. He sat down slow against nothing at all, the way a man sits when the strings are cut, and the bright star on his chest turned up to face the sky. And the man who'd made Cinder Wash into his own private country was finished in the middle of it. It was a woman off the noon stage who ended him, and not me. The rest went out of the morning fast, the way a fire drops when you pull the log it was standing on. Dolan's men had been brave on Dolan's wages, and there were no more wages. One threw his gun down in the road and put his hands up and stood there shaking. Then a second. The ones at the far end who could still run, ran, and nobody troubled to chase them far. A pistol clattered onto boards and lay still. Then the quiet came. Not all at once, but in pieces. The last shots trailing off down the valley, with none rising to take their place, until there was nothing left in the street but powder smoke going flat in the light, and the sound of a great many people breathing, who'd made up their minds they wouldn't get to. I turned, and Evelyn was already lowering the rifle. She hadn't moved off my right shoulder through the whole of it. She wore the cold, calm face she'd carried since the grave, the one that held together when everything around it didn't. And she looked at Dolan, sitting dead against nothing, and then she looked at me. I put my good hand over hers on the barrel and pressed the rifle the rest of the way down toward the dirt, and left it there a moment. We'd stood like this at first light, with the words still unspoken between us and a whole street ahead of us to die in. We were standing like it now, with the street gone quiet, and ours and the both of us still in it. And the word could keep. It had kept this long. Down the road a door opened, and then they were all opening, and Cinder Wash came out into its own street in the hard, clean light to look at what it had done. Old Pruitt stood over his broom as though he'd forgotten the use of it. Halloran came off his porch, still holding the broken shotgun he'd never fired. And Mrs. Abernathy stood where she had stood the whole time, dead in the middle of it, the ledger shut now and held to her chest with both arms, the way you hold a thing you've carried a long way and finally set down. Her son's name said out loud into a free road at last, and the man who'd taken it sitting dead a stone's throw off, and the page that would hang him safe against her heart. I stood in the middle of that town, with a dead man's business done and a 3-year-old star pinned on my coat. It was the wrong star for this street, and I knew it. The right one had been Whitfield's, and Whitfield was in the ground. But the tin was on my chest, and the road was theirs again, and the smoke was thinning out of the air. And for the first time in more mornings than I could put a number to, I was standing in a place, instead of already leaving it. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of morning, and they weren't that kind of town, not yet. They only came out slow and quiet into the light, and stood there, and let it be true a little at a time, that the weight they'd carried so long was gone, and wasn't coming back. The dust that the shooting had kicked up hung a moment, and then began to settle, down over the boards and the road and the still shape by the saloon. And Cinder Wash, that had breathed nothing but Dolan longer than most of them could rightly remember, stood in its own street and breathed. The law that came for Cinder Wash came from outside the county, which was the only kind that ever could have. A deputy marshal rode in 4 days after, a lean, tired man, with no stake in the valley and no reason on earth to look the other way. And Mrs. Abernathy put the ledger into his hands herself. She'd carried it against her chest for 4 days and would give it to no one. Not to me, not to anyone in the town, until him. He read the paying out pages and the entry that named the judge in full, and he didn't say much, but the not saying had a different weight to it than the town's old kind. He took the deeds too, and the 4 buyers' names, and a statement from everyone who'd sit and give one. There were a great many now who would. The judge 2 counties over kept his robe a month longer, and then didn't. I never went to watch it. I'd had my fill of courtrooms in the life I'd walked out of, and it was enough to know the page had gone somewhere, a page could do its work. Caleb came down off his ranch on the 5th day. I was on Abernathy's port with my arm still strapped to my chest, his own work, and it had held, when he rode in at a walk, the way a man rides when he's spent the whole way arguing himself out of the trip and hasn't finished. He got down. He looked at the tin still pinned to my coat, and at the strapping his hands had tied, and at a street that didn't answer to Dolan anymore. And he worked his jaw around it a while before any of it came loose. "You stood," he said, at last. Not a question. He said it like a thing he'd bet his whole life against and lost the bet on, and wasn't altogether sorry to have lost. I did. Figured you'd run. He looked off down the empty road. Told her you would. Told myself the same. A man doesn't unlearn a brother in 3 years. Or I thought he didn't. I had no answer better than the tin on my coat and the fact of my standing there. And an apology 3 years stale would only have insulted the size of the thing. So I gave him neither. I said, "You kept me breathing so I could stand. That's yours as much as mine." He grunted, the same grunt he'd given me over the wound, the one that meant he'd heard me and would sooner not have. Don't make it more than it was. I'd have patched a dog. He'd said that already, the first night, and it had been armour then. It wasn't now. He said it looking at the ground, and then he put out his hand, the right one, the one that had dug the lead out of my shoulder, and I took it, and that was the whole of it. No speech. We were neither of us speech-making men. It was half of what had broken us, and the only mending either of us knew. He held on a beat past what a handshake wants, and let go, and touched his hat to Evelyn in the doorway. And that was more from Caleb than a stranger had any right to. He stayed for coffee. He came back the week after, and the one after that. I won't pretend we made up 3 years. You don't. But a man can set a thing down without pretending he never carried it. And we set it down between us, a little at a time, the way the town set down its fear. We brought Thomas Whitfield in from the old works before the ground went hard. He'd been put in that shallow scrape by men who wanted him gone and unfound, and Evelyn would not leave him in it. So we dug him up gentle, where they dug him down rough, and brought him in. And the town gave him a place in the burying ground, on the rise east of the church. Good deep earth, a stone instead of a stick. Because he died asking the question they'd all been too afraid to ask. And they knew it now. And a town that has just found its own courage is generous with a man who had his first. I stood back while she said what she had to say to him. It wasn't my grave to stand over. I was the man he'd been told to find and never found. The one who'd have been his if the world had moved quicker or I had. And there's no standing close to a grave like that. You stand back. You hold your hat and you let the woman say goodbye to the future she came west carrying, and you don't crowd it. She didn't say much. She wasn't, by then, a woman who said much. The country had traded her a hard quiet for the softness it took. She knelt and set something at the head of the stone, and I didn't look to see what. It wasn't mine to see. And she spoke to him low, the way you speak to a man you've forgiven for dying. When she stood all the way up. The way she'd stood in the wash with the rifle. And she came and put her hand in mine, and we walked down off the rise and left him to the quiet he'd earned. The town mended around us through the fall. Halloran got glass back in the window Dolan's men had shot out. Real glass, freighted in at no small cost, and was prouder of it than the price warranted. Old Pruitt swept the same stretch of boardwalk he'd always swept, but he did it in broad daylight now, with his back to no man. The bottomland came off the forged deeds and went back, parcel by slow parcel, to the families it had been cut from. None of it was quick and none of it was tidy. Justice isn't. I'd learnt that hard once and forgotten it and learnt it again. But it moved the right direction, and a town that moves the right direction is a thing worth having stood in a street for. We took a piece of ground of our own that spring, out west where the grass ran long toward the hills, and nobody had ever thought it worth fighting over, which after everything was the very thing that recommended it. It wasn't much. A cabin I raised with 2 working arms by then. The left had come back to me over the winter, stiff in the cold and marked for good with a pucker of scar I'd carry to the end, but mine again, and strong enough. A well, a pole corral that owed more to Caleb's teaching than I'd ever owned to his face. Room to run stock in time. Room, mostly, that was ours, and the plain band on Evelyn's hand that made it so, put there quiet one morning that spring, with Caleb and the Abernathy woman for the whole of the wedding party. She stood on the porch of it the first evening it had a porch, watching the light go down behind the corral, and then she looked at me a while, longer than the going down had got, with something turning behind her eyes. "You still keep a horse grained and ready by the door," she said. It wasn't the question behind her eyes, and we both knew it. I'd broken that habit weeks back, and she knew it, the same as she knew I still woke of a night reaching for it. "Not for a while now," I said. "Why? It trouble you?" "No," she said. "That's the trouble." And there came the ghost of the first true smile I'd had out of her since before the grave, small and dry and entirely her own. And I understood we weren't talking about the horse, and that she knew I understood, and that this, a woman needling a man about his running on the porch of a house he'd raised her and hadn't left, was the thing we'd both come the whole long way round to arrive at without once saying its name. She'd bought a stage ticket west for a man and a wedding and a settled Ruth, and she'd got none of the 3 the way she'd drawn them in her head. The man was in the ground on the rise east of the church. What she'd got instead was the door of a house she had chosen, standing open at her back, and a country that had cost her everything soft and handed her, in the trade, a backbone she'd never have grown in Boston, and a man beside her who knew to the ounce what she was worth in a fight, and had watched her prove it, and would never once make the fool's mistake of trying to keep her clear of one. It wasn't the future she paid her fare for. I had the sense, by then, not to ask if she was sorry. She answered it anyway, without my asking, the way she had of answering the things I was too much a coward to say out loud. "I came out here for a door," she said, still watching the grass. "Not a man. A way through, to something of my own." She turned and put her back against the post and looked at me straight on. I found the door. She wasn't looking at the house when she said it, There's a word for what a woman means, saying that with her back to your porch post and her eyes off the house. I'd spent a lifetime not saying words, and most were better left where they lay. But there are one or two a man's a fool to carry into the ground the way Whitfield had carried his. So I said it. I won't set it down here. It was hers, said to her, and it's no business of the streets nor the pages. I'll only say I said it, out loud, in daylight, to the one soul left in the world I'd stopped being able to picture leaving. And that she said it back, plainer than I'd managed, because she'd always been the braver of the two of us, and never troubled to pretend otherwise. I never did warn her. That was the shape of the whole silence, back at the start. A man watching trouble walk toward a woman and holding his tongue. I've had a long while to sit with it. I've come to think she'd not have listened, and I've come to think I'm glad of it. A warning would have turned her back east to a small, safe life, and she'd be alive still, and ornamental, and going slowly out like a lamp low on oil. Instead, she stayed and dug and fought and buried the man she came for, and chose her own ground and her own life, and God help me, her own man. And not 1 hour of it was safe, and every hour of it was hers. The wind came down off the hills and moved through the grass and moved on, the way it always had and always would, over ground that had never much cared whose it was. But the house at our backs was ours, and its door stood open, and inside a lamp was lit against the coming dark, and Evelyn's hand was warm in mine on the porch of a place I had no notion of leaving. I'd run out the whole length of my running. This was the ground I'd stopped on, and standing there with her hand in mine and the dark coming soft over land that had turned out worth the staying, I found the word I'd spent my life fleeing, and the word for the thing I was standing in had come, in the end, to be the same word: home.